What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Policy Plug. This is your boy, Breon Wells. So look, we are heading into another major election cycle. And one of the thoughts and the songs that come to mind is Beyonce's Who Runs the World? And obviously the answer that she would give is girls. But if we're looking at the politics, the data points are undeniable. Not just women who really outpopulate men, but black women particularly have stepped in and saved electoral politics day in and day out, year after year. And really, they are a trending group. They are a formative group in this country. And so this conversation, this episode, I'm particularly excited about. Some of you know I own my own firm. We are a branding firm. We are a government relations firm. 67% of my clients are black women who run their own enterprises, who are showing up in major ways and spaces. So as we're thinking about the electoral power that they bring to bear and what they consider to be on the ballot box, what's on the table, I think that's a unique discussion. You'll remember that we had a couple of episodes back, Terrence Woodbury from Hit Strategies, as we talked about the vulnerabilities, particularly in the Democratic Party, of black male vote. But one thing that I have a burning question on is the black women vote something that is a surety, or should we just take it for granted that they are going to show up and always show up in the ways that we've seen them? I'm excited about this conversation because I have a phenomenal character, a phenomenal just human being. You know her from the Reecie Colbert show on Sirius XM. Everyone, let's clap it up here at the Policy Plug for Reecie Colbert.
Hey. Thank you for having me. I like how you said character too. Look, I think that's accurate.
Look, no, you do. Every time you bring, you know, yourself. It's the energy you bring. It's the passion. It's the intentionality. Those who follow you on social media, you have a way of articulating the take and your view on things. Clearly, it was one of the things that also helped in being on the Roland Martin show, because you know that is a character in and of himself.
Of course.
And it takes characters to be able to be on there and help share.
Energy.
You got to match that energy. How are you?
I'm good, Breon. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Welcome to the Policy Plug family. This is a group where we continue as we're journeying on to making it make sense in the policy space. Because we believe a lot of people are turned off by policy because they're turned off by politics.
Right.
And they're connected, but they're not the same.
Right.
But also we want to acknowledge the fact that policy touches every aspect of life.
Absolutely.
And so we want people really to know that they are the ones that influence and shape policy, tatted up, regardless of their past, regardless of their present. They didn't need to change anything to be able to roll up in these streets and tell these elected officials, these politicians at all levels, like, this is what I need.
Period.
This is what I'm looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So look, one of the things we do, we always start with humanizing those who influence policy. You are, one who influences policy, because we find that it helps to bridge those connection points. So for those that may not know, who is Reecie Colbert?
Well, okay, Reecie Colbert. So I am a wife, and mother, an amazing friend, fabulous girlfriend, to all my friends, and great family member, loyal, bold, authentic, unapologetic, unfiltered. Those are the main highlights, I would say, but also deeply committed to the truth.
Okay.
And helping people navigate this world, as you've mentioned, connecting the dots between so much of what people hear, much of it being untrue, and the impact of the things that they are unaware of or that they are aware of, but they might have the mistaken impression about. And so I think I like to say I'm a warrior for like disinformation and debunking it.
Yeah.
And just trying to get people engaged, because we're targeted to be disengaged. It's not organically disengaged. There has been a years-long campaign to make people feel disillusioned and disconnected. And so that's one of the things that I'm very passionate about combating.
I'm trying to place an accent. Where do you hail from?
Okay, so I'm a Cali girl.
Okay, what part?
Southern California, LA. Okay. I moved up all over. I went to UCLA for my undergrad. So your girl Nola, you had our girl Nola.
Yeah,
you had on the policy plug before. So that's a big part of it. Some people say I sound a little Southern, but I like to say it's probably the Cali in me that you might be hearing.
Look, I was trying to pinpoint. I said, where in the world is this? Got it. And so how long have you lived in the DMV? Look, welcome to the DMV area.
Hey, I love it here. Oh my gosh, this is like my forever city. But I've been here since 2016.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Right in time for stuff to just go down.
You did. You came at a transition period, if I am to keep it tactful and politically correct. At a transition period. So how did you get to this journey? Like, where did you go to you said UCLA is where you went to undergrad. Yep. And then what was your major?
So I was business economics with an accounting minor.
Okay.
So I'm still in corporate America, so my media career is actually like my fun part of my life. It's like my second career.
Yep.
But I still got my day job. But I got into the media space because I started up a page. It started off as a social media thing called Black Women Views Media. The thought behind that was Black women are always boxed in.
Okay.
And you kind of have to prove your worth. Like, I'm smart. And so if you're smart, then you can't Love and Hip Hop or Real Housewives or Basketball Wives. And or if you are into that, then people just assume that you're stupid or that you're frivolous. And I wanted it to place where people could be unapologetically both, where I could have the range of discussions with a group of people and not have to apologize for that.
Okay.
So that's what it started out. And then come the primaries, the Democratic primaries, I'd always done a mix of politics and entertainment. But when the primaries came about, I started to notice when Vice President Kamala Harris, then Senator Kamala Harris, announced her candidacy, that Black people specifically were being targeted with the hashtag. It was Tangibles 2020 was the hashtag. Mm-hmm. And every single post was disinformation about Vice President Kamala Harris. And I'm thinking, okay, well, wait a minute. If you're looking for tangibles and there are 19 candidates, why are all of these negative posts targeting the only Black woman in the race? Nobody else. So that's where my spidey senses started coming out, and people were regurgitating all these talking points. So I really got into debunking disinformation about Vice President Kamala Harris, who's still to this day the most attacked politician in the world, not even just in the country, with disinformation. And so that kind of blossomed into people being like, hey, I like her perspective. She keeps it real, but she brings receipts to Roland Martin, Clay Kane's show on Sirius XM, and now I have my own show on Sirius XM.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How long has that show been in existence on Sirius XM?
Since January of this year.
Come on here.
Yes.
How are you liking that? What are you feeling about that?
I love it. Like, before I announced it, but when I launched it before my first show, I said I wanted to feel like the Cookout.
Okay.
Because it's a Saturday show. Sirius XM Urban View is a political talk, mostly political talk channel. And I felt like I didn't want people to just hear the same conversations they heard all week, whether they're watching MSNBC or listening to Urban View. I wanted something different. So I have a mix of politics and entertainment and, trying to get a little bit of a different perspective than what you've heard all week. But it's a high energy show. It's not like come in, be depressed. It's 3 p.m. on Saturdays, Eastern time. And and people get it, they feel like it's the Cookout. And so that's the thing I'm most proud is that I had a vision for how I want it to come across. And that's exactly how it comes across every week. I'm curious, because I've been on radio shows. I've never had a radio show. One of the things I surprisingly, when I fell into podcasts, enjoyed about it was its therapeutic nature. Mm-hmm. Like, for me, I was like, well, first of all, I'm just getting stuff off my chest that I can't even really say to my clients or these other things. Yeah.
And then I was like, wait a minute, how many people are listening to us? Why are y'all still tuning in?
Yeah.
Is the radio show somewhat the same? Is there a therapeutic aspect to it? Do you find it to be?
Yeah, because I insisted on doing a live call-in show.
Okay.
So I didn't want it to be pre-recorded. Sometimes I do pre-record it, but for the most part, it's a live call-in show. I love the social aspect of it. I like the interactive aspect of it, and I like to kind of it's almost like research gathering.
Yeah.
Like I hear like what's the pushback? What are people feeling? And I know it's not a troll or a bot like what we see on social media. So I just love like to be able to real time have conversations with people, and sometimes they agree with me, sometimes I'm debunking what they're saying, but I feel like I'm reaching people because it feels more tangible with people calling in and us having that conversation.
Absolutely. I can dig it. So you went from California, you said you moved around a couple of spaces. Were any of them outside the country or still within the U.S.?
Okay. I like to travel internationally, but no, I haven't lived there.
Got it. And so then you came to the DMV area in 2016.
I was in Chicago before I went to came out here.
Got you. And so then you came out here in 2016. And that in and of itself was a political space. I know that was the first space that we would see disinformation and misinformation employed against the Black community more specifically than we have ever seen it before. I think I often like to be clear, disinformation and misinformation is for social media brought in a whole new amplifier, and we saw some purveyors. Before we get to unpacking, because when I tell you, and I was telling my team, and we saw some purveyors. Before we get to unpacking, because when I tell you, and I was telling my team, I was excited about this episode because I feel like there's about to be some lit conversation. There's about to be some lit conversation. But before we get there, we're celebrating 50 years of hip hop. And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, actually, when we had her for our live taping. Who is your favorite female hip-hop artist? I usually asked her who the major...
Oh, my goodness. My favorite female one. I have a lot that I enjoy.
Okay.
Because I grew up on Lil' Kim, Foxy Brown. It's kind of hard to choose between those two because like Foxy Brown and her like China doll era was like was something that was super cracking. But then Lil' Kim, she has some of the classics too. So if I had to choose one, I'm going to go with Lil' Kim.
Okay, yeah. Lil' Kim.
Lil' Kim.
Yeah,
I love all the new girls.
Back in the day, I had a crush once at a time on Lil' Kim. Probably like millions of potentially Black American boys back in the day. Because Lil' Kim was everything.
Yes.
So what's your favorite movie and or TV show genre? Like what, when you sitting down to watch something, what gets...
Okay, so I'm super into murder mysteries or like crime thrillers. Like, yes, that's my zhuzh.
I have preguntas. I got questions. Wait a minute. Now, a specific time area? Are we talking about Murder, She Wrote? Are we talking about some of the newer?
The newer
like
stuff.
New,
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so like the Brits have great like murder mysteries like on and Netflix as well. They have like a lot of like Turkish dramas. They're all dubbed in English.
Yes, they do.
But like the Europeans do murder mystery or crime thriller series, right? So
they do.
That's what I like to get into.
They do. I lived in Turkey for 4 years. Grew up I was in elementary to middle school.
Oh wow.
And so absolutely, I can vibe and get down. I can get down with that. And then if there was a movie that you said was the best reflection of your life.
Ooh, of my life.
I know. Like you like resonated with, what movie would that be?
Well, okay. I would aspirationally. I would say Boomerang.
Okay. Again, I got preguntas. Unpack this.
Well, I mean, there's no like connection, like in terms, you know, Marcus, the Playboy, but Robin Givens was just everything, and Holly was just everything. But Boomerang is like the epitome of Black excellence to me. It's just,
I can dig that.
It's fun. Everybody looks good. Everybody's successful. So I mean, obviously, I'm married with a very beautiful little girl, so they didn't have that aspect in Boomerang. But I feel like if you just think about Black excellence, I think Boomerang takes the cake.
Okay, yeah, and if y'all haven't seen it, go check out Boomerang. It is a dope movie, a very dope movie.
Oh yeah,
absolutely. So if we get back to, you know, this topic of misinformation, disinformation, 2016. What we do know is the Senate, the Select Senate Committee on Intelligence had produced a report. That report and the numerous reports showed that there was no evidence whatsoever that Russia, being the main, you know, actor and purveyor in 2016, changed any tabulations or votes. It's not like they went in and said, let's change votes from such and such. But what it did, that report produced, was that the Black community was targeted. And even including Black women. And yes, they targeted facets of the white community, but with a lens towards, again, the Black community. So for instance, they might generate through social media these posts that said, you know, to MAGA folks who were the target, then Blacks are coming in and taking your stuff. And if you vote for it, there's going to be crime waves and they're going to be, you know, climbing in your windows and snatching your people up. And if you were in the Black community, the targeted space towards it was these age-old, which weren't fully untrue, things about how your vote didn't really matter like that. And it was feeding into the apathy, the long history. It seemed that the case in point was that Russia, in one sense, had exploited on the conversations that we did not want to have in this country. And that made it a hot breeding ground for disinformation. At that point, though, in 2016, you coming newly to, you know, the DMV area, the epicenter of policy, what were you seeing, even, you know, you personally in that backdrop, like in 2016?
Yeah, no, I started noticing the disinformation campaign in 2016 on social media because a lot of the disinformation was, like, for instance, about Hillary Clinton and Haiti, you know, and they're robbing Haiti, or there was a lot of talk around abortion and how Margaret Sanger, and, you know, her hero was Margaret Sanger, and she was a eugenicist and all these things. And so there were Black blogs that I followed, like, you know, they were kind of obscure, you know, niche gossip blogs that all of a sudden started posting very much anti-Hillary kind of propaganda. And I was like, okay, this is weird because this page is not even political, you know? So where is this coming from? And I started to hear people regurgitate these talking points. And so I was like, okay, this is weird, you know? So when the report came out, I was like, that's what I was seeing. And I actually was talking about it a little bit. I didn't have the platform in the sense that I have it now, just on my own social media. I was talking about it like, you know, don't y'all think this is weird? Everybody's saying all these talking points together. And so that has continued, and really Russia has perfected it. And it's not just Russia at this point. It's Russia, it's Iran, it's a number of China. But also it's Republicans, you know, who have figured this out. And so we have domestic and foreign actors that are targeting Black people with disinformation for a number of purposes. We saw it during the pandemic, whether you agree with the vaccine or whatever else the situation may be, or masks. The fact of the matter was that the same tactics that were used in the 2016 and 2020, and well, it wasn't 2020 election then, but 2016 election, or yeah, actually it was 2020 by the time a lot of the COVID stuff was happening. Those same tactics were being deployed, but now for public health reasons. So it's always been very interesting to see that the tactics remain the same, even though they might have different aims. And then we remain the target audience for these tactics.
Got it. So let's go here. When we're looking at the landscape, we know that, and you made the statement, Kamala Harris is the most targeted when it comes to disinformation politician, not just in the United States, in the world.
Yeah.
I'm thinking with my hat on, as one who attended a predominantly white, a PWI, I'm thinking of the folks that say, well, that can't be, that's just exaggerated.
Okay.
Where's the proof would be the question.
Right.
Like, how can we substantiate that she is indeed the most targeted, and why do you believe that is?
Well, there is actual data behind this. For instance, I can go back to the first debate. There was a study that was done, and they
the first presidential debate. Okay, gotcha.
Well, the first presidential primary.
Yes, for the
debate
Democrats
in 2019, and they tracked the social media mentions of all the politicians, and they tracked whether there was an attack or whether there was a support tweet about it.
Okay.
Vice President Kamala Harris, then Senate Kamala Harris at that time, received 80% of the attacks for all of the candidates, and 80% of her attacks were 80% of the tweets directed about her were also attacks. So she got the lion's share of attacks, and then there was the highest proportion. The number one thing that they attacked her on was her race, saying that she wasn't black. So we weren't even having, or these people weren't even having a discussion about, I don't like what she says about abortion. I don't like what she says about immigration. They were talking about the fact that, or they were trying to perpetuate this notion that she's not really black. And that's still one of the main talking points that's used against her. And so the reason for that, I always go back to this because I think a lot of people, sometimes they look at my defense of her, they look at people defending her as kind of like, well, she's weak and that's why she needs defending. It's actually a sign of her strength that she is attacked so much, because if somebody is weak, then you let them be weak on their own.
Okay.
You want the weak ones to fly under the radar, because they're going to be baggage at the end of the day. When somebody's clawing you down, it's because you're strong. And so because of the historic position that she was in, and they were right to attack her, because guess what? She ended up on the ticket. She didn't end up as the presidential nominee, but she did end up as the VP nominee, and they won. So they saw, even going back to 2010, and I've looked at the coverage of her in chronological order, because I am the encyclopedia on Vice President Kamala Harris. From her first run as district attorney, and that was a historic win, up until all the way till her campaign. But I noticed in 2010, when she was running for attorney general, the nature of the coverage of her became significantly more negative, because they started to see that trajectory that she was on. And so it's the reason why she's attacked is because she's a threat to the status quo. As much people may not understand that, because they're not really familiar with the policy. As we talk about, they're familiar with the politics, but not the policy. And people don't, they're afraid of a black woman becoming the most powerful person in the world because of what black women bring to the table when we do get in these positions. Not all, right, but we bring equity, we bring more empathy, and we bring everybody along with us. It's not about stomping on these people to lift these people up. It's about lifting everybody up.
Yeah. Would you say, and I'm curious, because I would assume that a vast majority of these attacks that were out there were by trolls by those outside of the black community. There's also then been pushback that Kamala Harris has received from within the black community.
Right.
If we look at, when she was attorney general in California, and the truancy policy, there's been a lot of conversation around that, and people feeling some type of way about that. When she went into the Senate, of course, she was one of the ones that was championing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and these spaces. But there somehow seems to be a disconnect among some populations, and I would say younger Black populations, and like Kamala Harris. What are you hearing about that? What do you feel is behind that?
Well, I think, and this is going to sound like I'm just being a broken record, but I think it is disinformation.
Okay.
There is also the media is involved as well, right? Because one of the brilliant parts of effective disinformation is you take a kernel of truth or you take a situation, you remove the context around that situation to make it more inflammatory. Disinformation is intended to elicit to be provocative, to elicit a strong emotional reaction to something that in the full context, you might be like, oh, okay, I get it. That wasn't a big deal. Like you mentioned truancy, for instance. There was a hit piece that was put out against Vice President Kamala Harris by an ally of another presidential campaign. So there's also that you have people in the media that are allies of competition that put out things. These are basically opinion pieces, not neutral pieces. But there was, but even within those, if you drill into it, the work that she did around truancy, they highlighted the most prosecutorial truancy oriented counties. Every single one of those counties, the truancy prosecutions went down as a result of Vice President Kamala Harris's tenure. So her push to truancy actually decreased truancy while also decreasing prosecutions around truancy. Now, prosecutions are done at the local level. She wasn't prosecuting somebody as the attorney general, but that's, they say in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing. So it sounds a lot better to say, oh, she was locking up poor parents whose kids weren't at school, as opposed to going through the details that I've outlined. And so because of, we have the blogs that focus on the inflammatory things, that focus on, our headline sounds better, like taking out a clip and saying that she said she's not going to do anything for Black people, when what she said is, I'm not going to say it's only going to benefit Black people. The rest of the clip is because it benefits everybody, which is an indisputable fact. So when you slice 3 seconds and you take it out of the context, then it's going to elicit the intended effect. But the last thing I'll say is, I think that more of the conversation that we see on social media is disproportionate to what the numbers actually tell us. And I'll just let me just give you this one example. There was an A-lister, I'm not going to say her name, who Vice President Kamala Harris was selected as the nominee for the vice presidential nominee. Now, I have been in the trenches, so I already knew how it goes, and I already know that when you talk about Vice President Kamala Harris, and this is what I told her, if you've never talked about her, you have to understand that her name is programmed to elicit inauthentic correspondence. So you're going to attract all the trolls. Because you haven't talked about her, people who actually support her aren't looking to you to expect to see positive content from her, about her. But I said, okay, let's take this post, and I'm going to make the numbers easy, right? It had, let's say, 100,000 likes. And then it had, let's say, 1,000, just to be, it wasn't
good math. Yep.
I said, even if 100% of those 1,000 comments are negative, which they weren't, you had 100,000 people that just liked it and kept it moving. So look at the proportions of it. Like on Twitter, we say, oh, you got ratioed. So it's like you have 5 likes, but you have 1,000, retweets. If that happens, or 1,000 quote tweets, that means somebody's dragging you. So I tried to explain to her, I know that it's unnerving when you're receiving a lot of negative comments, but proportionally, it pales in comparison to the amount of support. But the support is more silent because it's just a like.
Right.
And so I say that to say, the data for Vice President Kamala Harris shows that she is mostly supported. And certainly she's one of the most, in terms of, we're talking about Democrats, Republicans, that's off the table. But in terms of Democratic politicians, she's, depending on what poll you look at, second or third. Biden is the most popular. Bernie her and Bernie go back and forth. Most popular politician and Democratic politician. So I think a lot of the narratives around her are not based in data. They're based on narratives, and based on emotion because of what we see.
Got you. And I definitely, I agree with you that she is the most targeted.
Yes.
And I think that it can be tied just back to the long history that we've had of targeting Black women anyway, even when we look at welfare discussions.
Oh, yeah. And
the more specifically the Black welfare queens that we supposedly, brought up as a trope. And I will give you that. I think part of one of the things that maybe some of the younger activists part to the policy side on the truancy would say is, yes, you are correct that the truancy numbers went down. But I think the concern was just the fact that sort of tactic and approach in policy was taken, like the thought of parents of children who could be subject to, being arrested or, whatever, the precedent that it sets, not necessarily just for her tenure, but who's coming after you.
Right.
And what that maybe opens up, because while you may practice it responsibly, per se, it has now opened up potentially a Pandora's box for, as we saw, like a 2016 follow-up character will come in and now say, hey, it was good for y'all, this policy, and they would practice it in irresponsible ways. Is that would you say that it is a valid concern then on some ways in that policy piece? Because I agree with you that there is a vast majority of disinformation that is targeted to her.
Right.
But also, is there that wiggle room to, are there spaces where there needed to be a little more of a nimble approach in the policy space?
I would say no. And the reason why I'm saying that is because truancy had been against the law in California since the 70s. So she didn't come in and create a truancy law out of thin air. She did not criminalize something that wasn't already criminalized. What she did was she put in standards that made a process so that you didn't just jump right to prosecution. That was about helping parents, helping identify things for them. When she was in district attorney of San Francisco, she nobody was prosecuted when she was district attorney. She got people bus passes, she got people work, and so I think if she could go back in time, maybe a couple of the comments that she made that anybody, if you go back and look at anything anybody is saying 15 years ago in that context, but put a 2020 lens on it, you're going to be like, girl, I don't know why you said that, or I don't know why you said it like that.
Yeah.
So I get why people made assumptions, or maybe why people had impressions about her intentions and about what the policy actually did. But if you actually do the digging behind it, if you actually look at the data behind it, what she did was actually help students. And I mean, truancy dropped by over 20% while she was district attorney with 0 prosecutions.
Okay.
But a lot of people don't like the tough on crime rhetoric. She wasn't a tough on crime person, actually. She called it smart on crime. And she did a lot to be smarter on crime. Increasing the number of neighborhood courts, which basically took things out of the regular judicial system and put it into community courts. So there wasn't a criminal record behind it.
Okay.
A lot of the things that people talk about, a lot of the things that these criminal justice activists talk about, she was doing it back in 2004, where they were calling her, they called her program that was back on crack. Because they wanted to send you to jail for 20 years if you had 2 grams of crack. And she was doing the opposite. She was taking them out of prison and getting them jobs and things like that. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding with her record. Part of that is because, again, people take clips. And then part of it is, I think, when she ran, she didn't really lean into her prosecutorial record. She kind of tried to say, she was accurate in calling herself a progressive prosecutor, but progressive prosecutor was just not something that people could wrap their head around.
Yep.
And so, that didn't stick in terms of what people took away from that. But
okay.
One thing I can tell you about her record is it was exceptionally progressive, and a lot of the people, you have like a Larry Krasner, you have, I remember there was, I want to say a Tiffany Caban or somebody like that in New York. Uh-huh. These people ran on initiatives that Vice President Kamala Harris did as district attorney.
Got it. Last question on Kamala before we go towards the broader Black women's space. Recently, there was an uncomfortable conversation that the Democratic Party needed to have when former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, got on CNN, and when she was asked about basically a Biden-Harris ticket, she gave what was perceived as less than a full, like, confident endorsement of, more specifically, Kamala Harris. And then that was followed by a wave of, like, them trying to clean it up by including Nancy Pelosi, but other Democratic members come on TV and say basically, hey, we support Kamala Harris on this ticket. How are you translating that from your lens? And when you look at the broader Democratic Party 2024, in which you have an election cycle in which at least both anticipated members at the top of the ticket are not popular right now, in the sense of folks are not wanting a Biden-Trump rematch, right? At least that's what polls are expressing. How are you interpreting that little, we'll call it a little wrinkle?
I'm interpreting it as, if y'all wanted a white woman on the ticket, then y'all should have voted for the white women on the prior tickets. Because you had Geraldine Ferraro, y'all didn't vote for them. Not enough of y'all did. You had Sarah Palin, y'all ain't vote for her either. Not enough of y'all did. You had Hillary Clinton. 55% of white women voted for Donald Trump. So I think what we're seeing now, and then also in the 2020 primaries, Biden was old in the 2020 primaries. And you had multiple white women running against Joe Biden who were on the ballot. And I ain't vote for none of those white women. And so now people are a little salty because a black woman went first. And people are really salty because a black woman is going to go first as the 2-term vice president. And people are a little salty because a black woman, until there is a president, a white woman president, will remain the highest ranking woman of all time, higher than the Speaker of the House. And so that is less about Vice President Kamala Harris than it is about their own resentment with the fact that they dropped the ball when all the white women had the opportunity to go first. And they also understand that the vice presidential to at least the presidential nominee pipeline is pretty undefeated. And so what they have to do is they have to perpetuate this narrative that she's uniquely unpopular or that she's deeply unpopular, when that's just not borne out by the data in terms of when you're looking at Democrats.
Okay.
Find me a poll where Gretchen Whitmer, Elizabeth Warren, who's also in her 70s and who lost 19 out of 19 states and never placed above third, including her home state in Massachusetts, she didn't place above third. Go show me the polls where any of those white women are more popular than Vice President Kamala Harris, and then we can have that conversation. Nancy Pelosi, bless her heart, has always been one of the most hated female politicians. It's her and Hillary right there neck and neck in terms of the most despised. I think that former Speaker Pelosi was an exceptional speaker. But she's the second highest ranking woman in politics. The first will remain Vice President Kamala Harris. And so I think that's more about them than it is about her. And I think that people need to get over it because that's the ticket. And trust me, if anybody thought they could beat Biden, we would have 20 people running against him right now. But aside from what the pundits say, aside from what people like to fantasize about, there's no real substantive argument for it. There's nobody that can come and make the argument that they could have gotten more done with the cards that were dealt. And if you want to say he was old in 2020 and he still beat out 20 other people. So he's older now. So is Trump. It is what it is, but they won.
So you attribute it to they've made the calculation that they could not beat out Joe Biden.
Absolutely.
Versus they're not playing deference, maybe, like the part. Because some of the fear might be if we go against the incumbent, funders, the main investors, the supporters that back will bring to bear their might and their power to disincentivize.
There you go. But that means you can't beat them, right?
Okay.
You can slice and dice it any kind of way. Oh, people are going to sabotage me. I'm not going to get the money, whatever. You got to win the nomination. And if anybody felt like they could, then they would do it. But 20 people lost against him. People like to say Kamala didn't get X, Y, and Z during the primaries. Neither did any of your other favorite candidates. Biden won. And my thing is, I want to win again. And so I don't have a particular affection for President Biden. I think he's a great president. Obviously, Vice President Kamala Harris is my girl. But you don't kick out the winning team. Republicans wouldn't do that. So it doesn't make any sense for us to do it. I don't see any other politician that has that wow factor to replace President Biden that isn't already on the ticket. So I think people are it's wishful thinking. I think it's people who are more focused on, narratives, the media chattering class, which I'm a counter voice in that chattering class, but of the majority of it. And like I said, if anybody thought he was weak enough to beat, they would all be running against him, and they're not. Interesting.
When we talk about black women, I told you earlier, I had a conversation with Terrence Woodbury, and we were talking about what hit strategies had put out as far as what they were seeing as they were listening to black men across the country. I personally believe that, not just I believe, the data shows black people generally show out in strong numbers in the election.
Right.
That does include young black men. We had historic voting turnout records in 2020. We had large numbers in 2018. And every time we talk about voter turnout and this fear that black voters are not going to turn out, we're usually talking about black men. We're usually talking about, with these young black men, they're not going to turn out this election. We need to do this focus. And what's not said is this sense of black women are always going to show out to vote as they usually do. Before we get into what policies are black women interested in, let's tackle this question of, should we take for granted? Because I've heard whispers, and I want to accurately describe it. It's not been loud, it's not been necessarily chatters, but I've heard pockets of conversations that suggest that there are black women that are thinking about sitting 2024 out, which is new news to me. Yeah. It would be a new news and a divergence from the strong trend we have seen since forever. What are you hearing? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you should never take the black vote for granted. You should never take black women for granted. And I was very much vocal about that during the 2020 election when I said you need to put a black woman on ticket and she needs to be Vice President Kamala Harris. But I think in terms of like I said, I have a radio show. I have a live calling radio show. I'm on the Clay Kane show on Thursdays. He has a daily show where we take calls. And I am concerned about the black vote. I'm always concerned about the black vote, which is why I spend a lot of time begging and pleading with black people to recognize the power of our votes. But I think that my approach is always policy oriented and substance oriented. And I think that the discussion has to be rooted in policy and in accomplishments and not just simply saying vote because it's important to vote. You have to bring some receipts to the table. And I think that the Democratic Party they're disadvantaged in a number of ways. Number one, they are too wordy. They put out fact sheets that have full 5 pages. They put out so much data without really the good headlines. Just give me 1 or 2 takeaways that I can take.
They struggle in communication.
They struggle in communications, but also I think that the Democratic Party thinks that this messaging war is going to be won organically. And it's not going to be won organically because nothing about us being targeted is organic. Nothing about the Republican Party's tactics is organic. It is informational warfare. And the Democrats think that they're just going to have a town hall or put out a video, and that is adequate. We need an army of people on our side to do exactly what the army on the other side is doing. Whether, you can play dirty, but even if you weren't playing dirty, get an army of people, or however you want it, maybe not people, but you know what I'm saying? Get an army of information spreaders, let me put it that way, to be PC, to really get this information out there. So I think that when it comes to Black voters, they're being targeted, in particular with, like, look at what the Asians got. Is what people always say, because I say it a certain way just to kind of poke fun at, like, the whole thing. And, the Asians got a hate crime bill, which is not what happened. But that is the perception, that the Asians got this super significant piece of legislation passed because they saw Asian Americans at the White House, and then they saw a bill called the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Bill, which they believe is the Asian Hate Crime Bill. They don't know it's called the COVID-19 Anti-Hate Crime Bill. They don't know what it actually does, which substantively is not really that significant.
Right. The policy of it is lost on them.
But that's more ingrained because that's what's being pushed, as opposed to the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, which took 200 times to pass, which Vice President Kamala Harris reignited that push when she got to the Senate in 2016, and was the first time it had ever passed. Her bill that she recruited Senator Cory Booker and Senator Tamara Scott for, that was the first time anti-lynching bill had ever passed the Senate after hundreds of attempts. So that is what gets lost. And so I think that people are right to be concerned about the turnout of Black voters, because we are targeted so relentlessly. And I think that the way that we're targeted is more relentless than the way that the Democratic Party is messaging to us. So they're way behind the ball in terms of the proportion of targets versus the proportion of authentic, substantive outreach.
Should we be concerned more specifically that Black women might not be turning out the vote in 2024?
Yeah, I mean, there is a Black woman problem as well. I think that when we look at some of the issues that are resonating with the portion, and mind you, the Democratic Party is used to 90+% of Black women, voting that do voting Republican. And I think that there might be people who don't feel comfortable voting Republican that might stay home because they're being targeted with issues like what's happening, the conversation that's happening around trans women in particular, trans sports, trans bathrooms. And there's so much hysteria about it, but it is resonating with a lot of people in a way that could very much adversely impact Democrats. I don't think that Democrats are super focused on it, but Republicans are. And I think that is, if I'm just naming one specific issue, right. And we've seen conversations recently about who's protecting Black women. I'm a real woman, And so that is concerning to me when the trans conversation is bringing out, to me, the worst in people. Let's just be honest. It's bringing out this hysteria that is completely unfounded, that could be detrimental to Democratic policies. And I don't think that there's a solution for that necessarily in the Democratic policy, because obviously they're not going to be transphobic. They're not going to be bigoted towards the LGBTQ community. But that is one of those things that I do think could be, an issue.
When we're thinking about policies, because one thing I do know about Black women voters, one, Black women, older Black people, are the most stable voters. And often when they approach the ballot box, not to say that we Black men don't, but more often than not, when Black women and older voters approach it, they approach it for a specific policy issue or topic that reaches out to them. What is, in your mind, on the ballot for Black women in 2024? What are Black women thinking about from the policy side as they're thinking about this next election?
I think that Black women are very much economic voters and healthcare voters and education voters. And so I think that in terms of maybe what they're looking for is they're looking for some pushback on some of these book bans and the attack on Black history in the sense. And because I've seen a lot more of an emotional response to what like Ron DeSantis is doing down there in Florida, what Greg Abbott is doing in Texas and a number of places. I think that's an issue that emotionally resonates with Black women in particular, Black men as well. But you're asking about Black women.
Right.
Healthcare is a big issue. So I remember I was on, a couple weeks ago, I was on Chicago Talk Radio, Black Talk Radio, and I talked about reproductive rights. And somebody said, well, that's a white woman issue. Let's talk about Black issues. And I'm like, excuse me? What? No, actually reproductive rights is a Black woman issue as well. Considering how Black women are disproportionately victims of sexual assault, and a number of violence against us. And so the whole notion that reproductive rights is a white woman's issue, not a Black woman's issue is crazy. I think now, is every Black woman going with that in mind? No, obviously not. But I think it is an issue. And then, we've seen things that the Democrats have passed, like through the Inflation Reduction Act, lower insulin costs. A lot of Black folks got diabetes, okay? And so what this administration and the Democrats have done is lower the cost of healthcare. And that's going to be rolled back from Republicans. And so I think that people who are serious about voting, they understand the issues. And then our challenge is getting those that are unserious or those that have been targeted to be disengaged or disillusioned, bringing those folks back into the fold.
A lot of people, you bring up an interesting point, because a lot of people, and one of the things that we've heard as, we're talking about age in this election has been, well, look at the deliverables that the Biden administration has accomplished.
Oh, yeah.
The IRA, right? The student loans, which he did, to be fair, he did put out there, is tied up in court.
Yeah.
As people forget that they are often one of then they're the third branch in the government that helps consider and do this policy making implementation. But do those things while they have been passed.
Yeah.
And they are either have been implemented, money has been sent out, it's in communities, or in the case of Justice for Black Farmers, or in the case of the student loan thing is tied up in courts, is if those things are reaching out to Black women, but we have this space where there might be some Black women that are disengaging, like what's the disconnect between... is there a disconnect? Is there a misalignment in what the Biden administration is saying they're producing versus what Black women are looking for in policy? Or is they're not feeling the implementation in the way they envision? Like, what's the disconnect or the challenge that might be there then?
Yeah, no, I think that it's a lot of it is feeling. I like to say facts, not feelings, but the reality is people go on feelings, not facts most of the time, because it has to feel real to them. And so, I'll take, for instance, the money that was the child tax credit.
Okay.
That was part of the American Rescue Plan.
Yep.
That was passed on strictly Democratic votes that was put forward by this administration. And you had parents who were getting, I want to say between $200 and $300, maybe $250 to $300 a month per kid, which is something that was unprecedented. It wasn't like you had to file at the end of the year and get your earned income tax credit. It was a monthly thing. That was something that Vice President Kamala Harris had in her platform when she had what it was called the LIFT Act. And that was a novel concept at that point, because it was, you're not going to have to wait till the end of the year and your tax return, you're going to get your checks monthly. So that idea of monthly checks was incorporated into the American Rescue Plan and how they're doing the child tax credit. But when people were surveyed about it, they didn't know why they were getting it. They didn't know who got it for them. And they were almost indifferent to continuing to receive it. That lifted half of Black children out of poverty. Those checks went to tens of millions of families that have children. And yet people were getting hundreds of dollars more a month. And they weren't feeling it. Why? In large part because inflation was kicking everybody's. Can I cuss on the show?
You can.
Inflation was kicking everybody's ass. It's still kicking our ass too, right? And so it was helping them keep up. In some cases, it was helping them get ahead. And so I think that there is always a disconnect because ultimately people go by what is tangible in their life.
Okay.
And you could be academic and you could talk about money being spent and money being allocated, but they want to feel it. And so I think that there's a sense of, I'm not personally feeling it to the extent, even though the damage would have been worse if you didn't have it. And then there's also that sense of somebody else is getting something and I'm not. That's another big thing. Ukraine, people know every billions of dollars, even though we spend over, what is it, like $800 billion or $1 trillion?
$886 billion is going to be the defense bill. This year.
And they're not counting those coins on anywhere else, but if it's going to Ukraine, then it's like they sending money to Ukraine. We ain't got nothing over here. So there's just certain things where it's like, if I say, well, actually, $7 billion has gone to HBCUs and $100 billion has gone to this, that, and the other, people are like, okay, whatever. But if the Republicans say Ukraine is getting another $10 billion, oh my God, because it's like they're getting something I'm not. So those are things that are complicated. They're not easy to combat, and that's why it's important to be as relentless at messaging as the others are at counter messaging.
Before I ask you why policy matters to you, because clearly, and I'm loving this discussion because we're getting to go down into the weeds on things. Student loan. Mm-hmm. What I did not unpack there when I, brought that up earlier is the ask that was made, that was available. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know what we do know, let's start with what we do know factually. Mm-hmm. The student loan conversation impacts Black and brown people the most.
Right.
And more specifically, Black women who are often taking on debt to go into an educational system. And we can unpack the long litany of systemic, institutionalized, and structural racism around, education segregation, Brown v. Board of Education, all these things, right? I believe what we landed on was $10,000 or less. Those that had, it would cover up to $10,000.
Yeah.
But I recall, and this is where it's fuzzy for me, that the ask from Black community and more from Black women was that number is low comparatively. We needed to be around the $20,000 to $50,000 range in order for it to make a dent. This administration, again, is touting, as they're looking at the 2024 election, that we're delivering in student loan forgiveness. But if the ask was for them to come in and ask higher, because in negotiation 101, you never want to negotiate from the middle because it's going to go down from there. Knowing that it impacts Black women the most, what is one, what do you feel should have? Are you fine with where it was, or what do you feel should have been done? And then, what is the next step from here on how the Black community, Black women more specifically, can mobilize once the court decides what it is going to be to try to make sure that economic alleviation is brought to bear?
So let me break down a couple of things. So $10,000 was the starting point, right? But for Pell Grant recipients, you got $20,000 of relief.
You're right. Yep.
And that was done strategically because that allowed Black people disproportionately to get the $20,000 because 76% of Black people were Pell Grant recipient eligible in college. And that is another thing that was Vice President Kamala Harris's prodding, because he actually credited her with that idea. And I remember back in the 2020 primaries when Vice President Kamala Harris used the Pell Grant eligibility as a requirement for a specific kind of entrepreneurship and home ownership plan that she had. And she was getting dragged on Twitter because people misinterpreted the program. But what VP understands is that explicitly racial bills are pretty much a non-starter, because of the Supreme Court. Now look, affirmative action's gutted and all that kind of stuff, right? For the most part, not entirely, but for the most part. So that was actually her idea to use the Pell Grant recipient thing. So it's not black, but it's mostly black. Because of that, because the folks went to court, the Republicans went to court and they argued that this disproportionately benefits black people, even though it wasn't written to say black, that's why it was successfully shot down.
Right.
So I need for black people to understand that this war is not with Vice President Kamala Harris, with President Joe Biden. It's with the Republicans. It's with the courts and I don't think that it's black people's responsibility alone to save the world, to vote. We give them the margins, but the reality is there's a whole lot of white folks is out there voting for these Republicans. But the math is still the math that had we turned out, you wouldn't have 3 right-wing Supreme Court justices. You wouldn't have had 200 justices appointed by Trump and McConnell, who are now Biden has appointed the most judges so quickly in his tenure so far. More black women. We had a black woman Supreme Court justice and a number of things. But now it's a little bit too late. We can't reverse time and go back and change the judges. We could only make sure that we continue to have Democrats in there to keep putting judges on there. That will be on our side. So I think that people just have to understand that there's a lot of work that is being done in the courts. But to the credit of the Biden-Harris administration, what they have done, they have a new plan that they call the SAVE plan, SAVE, it's an acronym. And this is kind of their workaround where it's like, okay, we'll reduce your payment and then we'll forgive the student loan. We'll forgive the balance after so many years. They've wiped out hundreds of millions of, if not billions of dollars of student loan debt already. And Republicans, John Cornyn specifically, have already said that they're going to try to put forth legislation to block that relief. And so for 2024, if the Republicans get back the Senate, if they hold the House and they get the White House, guess what? The stuff that you're not satisfied with is going to go away and be replaced by something even worse. And so student loan forgiveness or student loan relief is still on the ballot because those folks want to outlaw what the administration has been able to do through executive authority.
I think at the end of the day, a lot of people, especially if they're turned off by politics, part of what has not worked well, or I think, in my opinion, is going to have a shelf life at some point, is this giving people someone to vote against versus something to vote for. Mm-hmm. And to your point, and I agree with you, Democrats struggle tremendously with messaging. Mm-hmm. And so often then that leaves them, the way that it seems that it's translated is, well, let's say if you don't vote for us, Donald Trump's going to be, or if you don't vote for us, these Republicans are going to be your reality. And I think this question in part comes from personal reflection. So even as one who, I'm a faith leader hailing from the Christian faith. I stopped identifying as Protestant because for me it's one thing like, sure, I can tell you that, the word protest is literally in there and I can tell you what I'm against, but I have never necessarily had to articulate what I am for. And that's the connection spot that people really connect. Like right. Just because you're not my immediate enemy does not mean you're my friend. Right. What work needs to be done to remedy that? Because the 2016 message was surely Donald Trump is not going to win because he's talking disparaging about these minorities, more specifically Latino American voters, and there's no way. And we saw what the result was. 2020 was you have, you could continue having this pain or vote for, us. 2024, it sounds like a lot of it is, if you don't vote for Democrats, you're going to end up with Trump or these others.
Right.
And my concern is, I don't know that leaves room for them to articulate, though, what actually do you stand for? Mm-hmm. Do you stand for black people?
Right.
More than just 3 months before an election. Do you stand full-throatedly for Black Lives Mattering, even through policy and these other things?
Yeah.
What work in your mind needs to be done to kind of...
Well, I mean, I think they're doing the work.
Okay.
They've tried to brand Bidenomics, by every metric, what the Biden-Harris administration has been able to do. And I remember writing about the contrast between the analysis done on Trump's plan, because it was getting all this thing, the platinum plan, that BS, and the Biden-Harris plan, what that would do. And they've exceeded job growth. They've exceeded GDP growth. They have been saying we're going to be in a recession for how long? And it hasn't materialized. And so they're trying to brand their accomplishments. I think that they're up against, though, like I said, a very much inauthentic, relentless, well-funded campaign to convince people that everything is doom and gloom. And the media has the appetite for horse race coverage. And I don't think that the Democrats fight hard enough to really outline the dangers of the Republican Party. I think that they try to make an affirmative message. And sometimes you do have to scare the hell out of people. What I do is I outline the policy and the substantive accomplishments. Sometimes it lands, sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes people just don't care what has been done. Like, honestly, I made a video, I squeezed a bunch of stuff in 90 seconds to say, these are some of the highlights of, and I only focused on Black specific things that Vice President Kamala Harris has done. And you still have people after, they probably watched 15 seconds, but they were like, she ain't done nothing. And I'm like, these are literally things that she's done. Black home ownership, the appraisal bias. We see it when it goes viral. Oh, I had to have a white person come in and my house shot up $700,000 in value. Well, they're tackling that. Black maternal mortality. When I say that, people's eyes gloss over, like, who gives a damn about Black women dying of birth? I mean, But there's also Black infant mortality.
Yeah.
So do you care about Black babies dying if you don't care about Black women dying? Black infant mortality, Black maternal mortality, they go hand in hand, because that racial, that racism that kills Black women during childbirth or after is the same thing as killing Black babies. Mm-hmm. But people don't care. And so we have a number of issues. Black unemployment has been at its lowest that we've ever seen. They've put all this money into Black businesses. Like I said, when you talk about healthcare, we have benefited from that. More Black people have gotten insured under the provisions that they've made, under the American Rescue Plan, a number of things. Our neighborhoods are getting built up again with the Infrastructure Act. The lead pipes are being removed across the entire country. You can point to a number of administration officials, Michael Regan, who is the EPA administrator. We talked to Secretary Fudge, who's done reforms so that the banned box, so that if you have a record, then everybody doesn't get kicked out of your apartment or whatever. I could literally talk for such a long time about all of the things that they've done. We don't have to have a defensive, well, they ain't really do nothing, but still vote for them anyway posture. And I actually get frustrated when I'm having conversations with people who are almost apologizing for Democrats. And I'm like, wait a second, this is one of the most accomplished administrations in history, if you just look at it. But the problem is that they put out so much information in a way that's not sexy for people. It's not packageable easily. And they kind of talk about it once and then they tend to move on. Okay. The most relentless messaging that I've heard from the Democratic Party was the folks who was tweeting, today is a good day for Biden to cancel student debt. They were on message for that for over a year. But that was the only consistent Democratic Party messaging. And the Republicans, they have their talking points and they run with it. So there are a number of challenges, but it's not going to be won by, okay, we've come up with the yes, we can slogan or something easy. It is war out there on the information front, and that's what they have to get and make a change on really fast.
Got it. I have enjoyed myself in this interview.
Me too.
I want to thank you for being in this episode. I'm going to clap it up for you. Absolutely. You. And definitely I'm going to have you back on to continue this conversation.
Oh, yeah.
So, Policy Plug fam, we've had yet again, y'all hear me say this word dynamic all the time, but these conversations truly are dynamic because these are people with substance, and there's always room in the policy space for disagreement. But our whole thing is make sure that you are coming together with facts and coming together in this space. I think one of the many takeaways I've had from this, again, we should not take not only the black vote, but the black female vote, the black women vote for granted. But also, if you are that black woman that is part of that collective that's continued to show up and vote, that there is opportunity to continue to evaluate what issues matter to you the most, what is driving you out to the ballot box. And then on top of that, which one of these elected officials or even politicians, candidates, regardless of their party, is responding in appropriate ways to your policy? Because at the end of the day, one, policy matters. It touches every aspect of life. But then implementation is the most important part. So if you're turning out, think about not just this one candidate at the federal level that might be someone that resonates with you, but making sure that it's all the way down the ballot, from at the federal level all down to the most local municipality. Because again, a lot of that policy is implemented at the local space. You've heard it from here, Reecie, with her character, the way that she has shown up in all of these ways. And so this has been another episode of the Policy Plug. This is the space where we humanize the people who influence policy and bring the policy to the people.